right. Finally, we are here to talk about the elements of visual rhetoric and what strategies, tools, and techniques you need to look for and identify when analyzing visual rhetoric. The first thing you need to remember when it comes to analyzing visual images is that everything we've learned about the rhetorical situation still holds true. You still need to be considering the communicator, the audience, the purpose and message, exigence, context, all of those parts of the rhetorical situation. I just want to point out a few things that might need to be approached a little bit differently when considering the rhetorical situation of a visual image. Like your textbook says, for the most part, especially when it comes to ads, most visual images aren't produced by just one person, like a text. It's usually an entity, a company, or a group. So while maybe one photographer took the image, you have to consider it as being chosen and produced and representing the message of an entity. Okay, especially with visual images, the message or the purpose will most likely not be explicitly stated, right? You have to read the image to figure out the purpose or the message. Technology, considering the technology used to create an image is slightly more important with images than it is with text. It may not matter so much if a text is handwritten or typed, but it does matter a great deal if we have a photograph versus a hand-drawn illustration. And if that photo has been photoshopped, right, that kind of matters quite a bit, or if the photo's been altered or cropped or something. Circulation matters, it definitely matters for both, but for images, you want to be thinking a lot about, is this released in print? Is this released on a billboard, on some sort of material object? Or is this image circulating online? And if it's released online, where was it released on? Is it social media? Was it part of text? Was it with text? And that's sort of here going along with context, the interplay with text. With visual images, you always need to be aware about an interplay with text. Is the image serving as an illustration for text? Does the image have a caption? Is there text inside the image? You've always got to be considering the interplay with text when it comes to visual images. Okay, we're going to run through a list of visual tools or strategies used in visual rhetoric. Your book divides them up into formal and social layers, which is fine, but that's not really a distinction that matters a whole lot to me, especially when you are writing about these in your rhetorical analysis. You don't necessarily need to say, here are the formal layers, here are the social layers. What matters is whether you can identify these features in your ads and talk about their rhetorical significance. So let's start with the idea of emphasis. Emphasis, where is your eye drawn in the image? Okay, that's important, right? That's rhetorically important. What is the image playing up and what is the image playing down? So here we have this image from classic art, and we could talk about this image actually in the category of lighting and contrast too, but you can see that the way the lighting works is to draw your eye to the young woman here. The young woman in the picture is emphasized. You immediately, when you look at this image, you immediately move either to her face, looking at her face, or maybe you're actually more drawn to the ample cleavage, but that's where the light is, and so that's where the emphasis is in this image. The darkness, the shadow, sort of downplays emphasis on the other two figures here. And you kind of have to look really closely to even tell this one's a man probably, and this one a woman, maybe. They're just so much in shadow that they're very much downplayed and de-emphasized. You still notice them for sure, but the emphasis is on the young women. Now, why is that? Oh, well, that's your job. You got to figure out why it's significant that the woman is emphasized and the shadow figures aren't. Framing. Okay, framing is super important. I love this trend that's been going around Twitter recently. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but a photographer showing their setup versus the shot that they actually get, because you can really see how the frame of a photo matters so much. They can cut out all of the visual information. In this example here, you can see that the shot cuts out all the visual information of the tub, the ugly concrete around, the fact that this is actually not a very glamorous setting, and you frame it out, and all of a sudden it looks super glamorous and beautiful, right? Um, and it's really funny to actually know that this is taking place not in some beautiful green pond somewhere, but in a tub in someone's ugly backyard. I kind of like to think of the idea of framing in relation to social media too, social media feeds. So the images on social media are clearly all framed, all cropped, so that you see the images that the person wants you to see. But you can also think of social media feeds as being framed, right? Um, that you crop out, or your images show the happy, wonderful, shiny parts of your life and sort of don't show the reality of life. Uh, so when you think of analyzing your ad images, you want to think about how the image is framed and what might be outside of the frame and why. This can be really important sometimes, especially advertisers tend to do things like they will crop an image so that a woman's head is cut away and all you see is her body, and that can send a message that only the female body matters, not her mind or not her head or something like that, right? So framing can be really important in sending messages and in cropping out uh, the reality of a situation. Okay, point of view. Point of view is an interesting one. Um, and it can be very obvious or it can be more subtle. What it does is the point of view of the image allows you to look at the world through the view of a subject or just from a different point of view that's not your normal point of view. So this image here, you can see this is a screenshot from the movie E.T. If you're familiar with that movie, hopefully. I know it's a classic. Um, so this shot here is E.T.'s dressed up as a ghost. E.T.'s an alien, right? We all know this, right? He's an alien, and so for Halloween, to keep him around, little boy Elliot dressed him up as a ghost. So we have this shot from E.T.'s point of view, looking out through his ghost costume. So you see here, these ovals are the eyes of the ghost costume, and we're seeing the world through E.T.'s eyes. Um, so this is a way for the viewer to connect with E.T. and to see the world through his point of view. But even if we aren't literally seeing, even if the picture isn't so obviously from an actual subject's eyes, there's still other ways that a photo or image might represent a particular point of view. So think of like aerial shots that are taken from high above, or just, like really high angled shots or low angled shots. All of those are presenting a unique point of view, right? And they can influence how we think or feel about what we're viewing. Okay, focus. The focus of an image is another way of adding emphasis or of directing the eye or communicating how to feel about an image. So here you can see that the eye is either drawn to the flower in this image because the rest of it is blurred out and not in focus. Conversely, in this image, the eye is drawn to the woman's face, and the flower, even though it's foregrounded, is blurred and therefore not the focus of the picture. So where things are in focus or out of focus, or whether the image has a soft focus or a hard focus, can communicate where we should be paying attention, what we need to be paying attention to, what the creators want us to be paying attention to, or just creating a mood of how we're supposed to feel about the picture. Film actually does this all the time too, changing the focus to tell the viewer who is speaking it or who we should be paying attention to. Okay, distance from subject. This is an interesting one. And I love this classic picture here. This is called Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. So hopefully, maybe you're familiar with the story of Icarus from Greek mythology. His father made him wings out of feather and wax so that he could fly, and he was able to fly out over the ocean to escape imprisonment. But, so the story goes, he flew too high, too close to the sun, the wax melted, his wings fell apart, and Icarus fell to his death in the ocean. So this picture here is illustrating that. But what's so interesting about this picture is that here's Icarus right here, just these tiny little pair of legs of, after he's fallen into the ocean. He's the subject of the painting. He's what the painting, like he shows up in the title of the painting. Um, but this painting is very much distanced from the subject. The artist has done this for a very purposeful rhetorical effect. The message is, I'm actually going to give you the message now. The message is that um, the world moves on. Like the farmers are still plowing, the ships are still sailing, even though this super momentous moment in Greek mythology is happening, even though Icarus is experiencing his death, the rest of the world keeps moving on. And that's what the distance of this painting is communicating, right? So even though Icarus is the subject, the distance from him is helping us to communicate something else. Now, distance can be very close up too, right? Um, there could be close ups, and there are other paintings that show very much close ups of Icarus, and those ones really foreground his tragedy. Okay, so distance from the subject can be very rhetorically effective. Okay, lighting and contrast does a lot for communicating mood or emotion too. Um, so here we have two images. This one right here is called low-key lighting, right? It's darker, it's more somber. The effect is to make the image feel muted or quieter or more somber or serious. This isn't a particularly sad image, but low-key lighting would be used for sadder images or just for very serious or somber images, right? This one over here is using high-key lighting, and it's meant to feel light and airy and bright, maybe more happy, potentially. So lighting can communicate a lot of things, or the amount of contrast. If you remember back to the contrast in our first painting with that had the subjects in shadow versus the woman who was very brightly illuminated, that's contrast. That helps direct your eye and also evokes mood too. Okay, and now we have color. Color absolutely has rhetorical effect, especially in creating a pathetic appeal, or that is an appeal to emotions. Color is huge in emotions. You need to be talking about color in your ads, or you're not talking about the right things. Okay, this image is one that I brought up in our first PowerPoint lesson on rhetoric, right? Starry Night from Vincent van Gogh. And I asked the question, is this rhetorical? Is this image communicating? Well, if through nothing else, then it is absolutely communicating through color. Mostly this is dark with lots of swirling blue. And Van Gogh was well known for his depression, sadness, the color of blue. This image also has spots of light, though, moon and stars. And these are bright spots in an otherwise dark and sad life. So do you see how the colors communicate that very effectively? Um, Lots of sharp, disturbing darkness, swirling blue sadness, points of bright light happiness. Now, as your book points out, colors don't have universal meanings. They have socially constructed meanings. So one way to talk about them is to talk about how the colors make you specifically feel personally. All right? That's a good way to talk about colors, how they make you feel. Next, we want to talk about dominant shapes. Shapes, just like colors, can sometimes communicate meaning to people. They're not necessarily universal meanings, but they can be. So for instance, circle shapes are found in nature, and they can represent wholeness or completeness or eternity, among other things. Squares are more man-made. They can represent solidness or strength or order or rationality, depending. Triangles also have meanings. Three sides symbolize symbols that point different directions, often upward. There's also a feeling of action potentially with triangles. So these shapes may be obviously in the image, like here the bubbles in the window, those are obvious circles, obvious squares, or they might be more subtly in the composition, like here this classic triangle in classic art. It's just in the way the subjects are oriented that you can sort of sense the triangle. So those are something to think about if you feel like shapes are playing an obvious role in the image of the ad you're analyzing. Okay, narrative. Let's talk about narrative. Pictures tell stories. They may be simple stories or they may be some quite complex stories. But if your image tells a story, you need to talk about the rhetorical effect of that story. I think I also used this image in that first PowerPoint, but this one is such a great image for telling a universal story, right? And it's such a universal story that can be applied to many different situations, which is why it became such a hot meme a few years ago. So it's telling a story through the bodies of the actors, right? So there's an event, but we get what's going on through looking at the bodies of these actors. Now, if you have people in your image, you've got to talk about what those bodies, the meanings of those bodies, okay? If they're human, even if they're non-human bodies, they are actors and they are communicating. They're laden with visual meaning. Okay, first we have an obviously male body. We have two female bodies. The body language of the man, he's holding the hand of one girl, but clearly looking with longing and pleasure at the other girl. Okay, then there's the emotions on the face of this girlfriend. Oh, we could also talk about, how she is blurred and they're the focus and all those other things. But all of these things tell a story. You have to analyze bodies, right? And you have to look at things like age and gender and race and emotions, body language, all of those things, because all of those things communicate. All of those things are rhetorically significant. Okay, finally, we need to talk about objects in images. So just like in real life, just like we talked about in Unit 1 with our rhetorical objects that communicate, when you have objects in an image, they still communicate whatever they would in real life. So remember the diamond ring? The diamond ring is a symbol of eternal love and marriage. Well, it is by itself, that symbol, but even in a picture of it is going to have those same symbolic meanings. So any object that shows up in an image is part of that image's meaning. Here we have two bodies that are communicating, so we can analyze them as bodies by their pose. Their pose is definitely communicating the way they look. But the objects in the image also help to communicate the message too. So objects like the sunglasses, the clothing, the suit this man is wearing, the white dress this woman is wearing, and I would say most importantly, this yacht, right? The fact, at least I'm assuming it's a yacht. I guess I don't know my boats very well, but fancy boat, right? All of these things work together to communicate a social meaning of wealth and economic status, right? All of that's working together to communicate that we've got some wealth here. All right, now let's practice doing a rhetorical analysis of an image together. This image is almost 4 years old now, but I still find it just a really fascinating image. This was Time Magazine's cover of image of Trump in 2016 after the election when they named him Person of the Year. Now, so let's think of the rhetorical situation and context of this picture. This came right after the election, and you have to think about the creators of this image, which is whoever's on the editorial board of Time, whatever the entity of Time Magazine. Time it's perhaps not the worst, but it is decidedly a liberal-leaning magazine. So you know off the bat that the people who work there probably don't like Trump. And this is the image they chose. Let's look at what's going this image. The first thing is to notice Trump is sitting in a chair. Okay, this sitting pose is reminiscent of some other famous heads of state images. See here we have an image of Napoleon sitting in a chair. Here we have the Lincoln Memorial where Lincoln is sitting in a chair. So this is a very common pose here. They are nodding to the fact that Trump is a head of state. But the chair is backward. Trump's body is facing away from the camera with Trump looking over his shoulder, unlike Napoleon and Lincoln here, who are both forward facing. So what does that positioning mean? It's clearly significant. It's possibly that the creators of this image believe Trump is moving backward, is a leader leading the country in the wrong direction. That is a possible rhetorical meaning. Another point about the chair, this is a close-up of it. This is a Louis XV chair designed in France in the mid-18th century, so before the French Revolution, when the kings of France were at the height of their power and the common people of France were suffering the most. So by having Trump sit in this chair, the creators are acknowledging that Trump is a head of state. It's a king chair, but they are associating him with monarchy, not democracy, and a monarchy that was renowned for its cruelty and excesses. You'll notice that the chair is worn. You can sort of see the fabric is worn. It's an antique. It's falling apart. There's scrapes and scuffs. And this is possibly communicating that, like monarchy, Trump's ideas and leadership are antiques, outdated, belong to a different era in the past. That idea is heightened by the filter used in this whole image. The lighting, the contrast, all evoke a filter that's called Kodachrome. It was a popular filter in the 50s and 60s. And again, that's sort of meant to evoke the feeling of vintageness, but in a somber and dark way. Again, see, the image is all just sort of dark, hinting that Trump is out of date, belongs to the past, is not fit to lead into the future, etc. So what is most interesting about this picture is that it both honors Trump for being a leader. I mean, it acknowledges him as a leader, as a head of state, while critiquing him for being the wrong kind of leader. It's really a stroke of brilliant visual rhetoric. Whether you like Trump or not, whether you agree with the message of the picture or not, it is really brilliant, subtle, but very clear visual rhetoric. I hope that was helpful, showing you how to sort of use these features to analyze the visual elements of a picture, and I hope you're able to now take these visual rhetorical strategies that we talked about and identify them in your own ad. I also hope you took good notes, because now you'll be turning in your note sheet.